Welcome back to another Terranscapes video. Thank you so much for joining me today, taking some small piece of your day and setting it aside to take a look at what I've been working on. Very appreciated. We are going to look today at the carriage wheels, or the wheel prototype I have been working on. And then we are going to take a look at my preliminary work on one of the miniatures. The miniatures finally arrived, and I wanted immediately to take one and put him in the seated position. This one was a male, so that I could get a sense of how the carriage, now known as the charabanc, will be proportioned. Is it designed right for these size miniatures? And I wanted to thank Life After Work for reminding me that my 3D mock-up is best described as a maquette. And I have had other people tell me that in the past, and I have forgotten it, and I think I won't forget it now. And he had mentioned that in one of his comments, so I appreciate that. So I have my mini in the maquette charabanc. That's got to be super clear to everybody, right? All right. Well, anyway, we're going to go take a look at that. And I think we should just go take a look at it right now. And I'll see you over at the bench. So here you see the first wheel that I constructed. The materials I used were 2 strips of .030 styrene strips. They are 0.156 across. And these are .06 styrene rods. And I forget the diameter of the hub, but we'll skip that. The outside of the rim, I created a frame to bend the styrene into, because getting this around in a circle is more difficult than I expected. And in fact, when I put it into the frame, I had to put it in very, very tightly. When you bend a strip, it's quite flexible, and you would think I'd be able to make a circle quite easily. However, the flexibility ends as it approaches one of the cut ends. You can see how it just doesn't want to bend that last little bit. In order to get it to press into the frame, it has to be very, very, very tight. And you can see when I do that it is now I can force it into that circle. But I need 2 strips, because 1 strip meeting end to end is not going to be very strong, and having the second strip in the opposite direction allows me to press a rounded, like a known round edge of a strip against those 2 meeting ends of the outside strip, if that makes any sense. And when I did that, then I made a diagram of the spokes angles on paper, and I used a washer to sit above the surface so that when I placed the spokes, they would be equal height going around. And in fact, in this one, it came out pretty well that those spokes are just about centered on the rim. And I was pretty happy about that. The spokes were hard to align visually. And then I also discovered that the spokes actually don't fit around the hub. There's not enough space there's 12 spokes here, which I thought was, that was interesting. I hadn't expected that. So one of the spokes is sitting up a little high, but then a couple are crooked. Trying to visually align them from a top-down view is near impossible to get accurate. So I decided I would make a jig to help me align the spokes. So I got out some of my old mold-making clay, and then I had to spend an hour and a half conditioning it so that I could actually use it. It's been sitting on the shelf for a while. But this allowed me to accurately strike where the spokes should go and make an impression to receive the spokes so that they would all sit in the proper direction. And I also trimmed the inside of the spokes at an angle so that I could fit them. This is not the arrangement that I am going to have for the final wheel, but I wanted to do a second one while I'm waiting for some materials to arrive. And I figure, let me do a second one, even though this isn't quite right, just to see how does some kind of like a simple jig like this work, and how does the wheel's roundness, how much can I sort of force it around the spokes to ensure that it stays true? This wheel is quite a bit worse than the other one on the outside edge. Spokes are much better. The reason is that something weird started to happen. When I pressed the rim into that, I guess another jig, really, really tightly on this go. And I really wanted it to be, perfect circle. When I started applying CA, I was using very thin CA as my adhesive. When I would apply the CA, the styrene started to crack. And at first, I actually threw out 2 previous versions because I thought I was cracking them, putting them into the circle jig. And I put in this one, looking at it, all right, I didn't have any cracks. And as soon as I put a drop down, it would wick, and all of a sudden the styrene would crack. I can't explain that except to think that, so for instance, right here, there's a crack. And that just formed on its own. The only way I can explain it is that maybe the CA does weaken styrene, but we normally don't notice that because it's not under a lot of tension, and this is under a lot of tension. So I had to abandon that, go with some styrene cement, and actually it ended up breaking, and so I ended up putting in some scraps and bringing it back together because I didn't want to make another one. And I thought, let's see how much I can fix it by putting it around properly spaced spokes. Clearly, I was not able to get it perfectly round, but I will say this thing was messed up. So this is pretty remarkable considering that. And I did go around and I sanded some of the high spots to try to bring it into a little bit more of a round shape. Learned a lot, and I feel pretty confident now going forward. I'll be making the final jig using Super Sculpey, and then I can bake that and have the jig reusable for both wheels. And I'm going to consider, if I can, I don't know, of making the front wheels on the same jig and just have a inner circle to receive the inner rim. And I think I can do that, and that would mean that the front and there's a hair in here, sorry about that. The front and rear wheels will have the same number of spokes, but I think that could be okay, and I can change the thickness of the spokes for the front wheel if I want to feel like I need to set them apart somehow. So what are the modifications going to be going forward? I am going to use thinner styrene for the outside rim because that will allow me to bend it much more easily with a lot less stress on it. That should ensure that I can get a true circle out of that much easier, and I'll be making a proper jig for that, and probably cut a circle with my hole saw out of hardboard, and then I can put a little wax on the outside of that so that it won't super glue to the hardboard, and I should be able to bend the wheel rims into that much more easily. So I'll use 0.05, which I'm waiting for. I've ordered a bunch of styrene parts, and I can use 3 layers of that. So each of those layers should bend much easier, and they will overlap in different spots. And so it should give me a nice, strong, round wheel. That's the hope. And then I'm going to change the spokes. The wheel I want will have 20 spokes, and obviously I can't fit 20 using this size. I have 0.030 spokes. These are 0.06, but they look a little thin to me, and I didn't have any sizes in between. So I have a 035, 04, 045, 05 coming, and once I get those, I can sit down and look at those diameters and think about which one will fit best. I have some revisions to make to the carriage, and I'll share with you another one in a second. One of the things I felt like I needed to do was not only to bring the wheels in closer to the carriage body, but I also thought I needed to make the rear wheels a little bit smaller. So that is why I sized it about that, and once I get my hole saw out and I see what size holes it can cut, that might modify the outer rim size just a little bit. So we'll see. So that was my wheel construction. I chose the wheels for my first start because I expected them to be the most difficult. This is the only thing in the layout that really has a round shape that I have to form from styrene as a circle, and because our eye picks up problems very, very easily with regular shapes. I felt like this is the one that is going to really hang me up. So I spent some time problem solving it. I feel pretty good about it. And it took me a little longer than I would have liked, but I'm okay with that because as long as I get to the end result I want, then that's where I want to be, and I'm okay with that. New light, new battery in the light, and I'm going to be working on my lighting at the bench a little bit coming up. I didn't have time to really tweak it today, so if it's little harsh shadows in a few areas, I'm going to be making some modifications. I want to change up things to make it easier for me to set up lights, and that's going to require a little trial and error going forward. The miniatures that I ordered finally arrived. Yay! This is one. I don't know, I might do a review of them next week. I'll think about it because these are Ironclad miniatures. That's a manufacturer of miniatures that most of you probably don't know about. And the miniatures have some positives and some negatives. And I don't know, it seems like something you might be interested in. So I'll try and check the comments and see if this gets a resounding yes. When they arrived, this is one of the fancier gentlemen, my Victorians. I immediately thought, okay, I need to measure him and see how big he is. So getting out my trusty ruler, measuring from his foot to the top of his head, not the hat. A lot of times they measure either to the eyes or to the top of the head. I measure to the top of the head, 30 millimeters. I expected these to be 28 millimeter at the largest. A lot of secondary manufacturers with historical miniatures tend to be on the smaller side. They don't go quite as heroic as some of the more popular lines, but they're 30. And I really built the Carriage with 28 mil miniatures in mind, so I got a little nervous about that. And there's probably going to need to be some modifications, but I also discovered something else that really surprised me. So this is my first attempt to sculpt a miniature in the seated position. And I didn't finish him fully because I was really just trying to get the raw profile of him seated down. Let's see if I hold him like this. You can probably see that a little bit better. One of my hopes was that I could just make a V cut with my Dremel and then bend the legs up into the void. But this is, this kind of pewter metal that minis are cast in is very, very brittle. And it started cracking even with it being thinned quite a bit. And then I also realized that there's some modifications to body shape that needs to happen that isn't going to be really replicated by just bending and lifting, up a section. So I ended up cutting all the way through the miniature, which also meant that there was a lot of material removed. So I puttied it back in, and this is not finished, but just to hold that position. I did the same with the knees. I undercut on the underside of the knee, and then with the knees, I was going to bend those, thinking they're thinner, and they both broke off. So then I had to glue them back on and do a little light putty work on them. Just before I show you the bench, one of my big discoveries is that I'm going to have to make more changes than I thought in some of the areas of the miniatures. Case in point, his coat. When he's standing, his waistcoat comes down just above his knees, and it's like a sort of like a trench coat, if you will. And when you seat him, this is all wrong. In fact, the cloth should follow very close to his leg, maybe have a little nice dip in there, and then come out a little bit, maybe drape a little lower on the back side. Maybe spill onto the seat a little bit, right? That clothing does a lot, and this is not doing it. So I will need to make some modifications, and for the ladies in their dresses, I may be resculpting the entire lower half of them because modifying their existing dresses is probably impossible. So that was my first discovery of this process. I might go in and try to do some more work on him. In fact, I know I will, because I'd like to use him as a test piece. He's not actually intended for the display. He was an extra miniature, and I thought a great one to experiment with. Once I had that set up, it was time to see him in the Carriage. Now, I didn't set up two cameras for this, so I'm going to flip things on their side, and I'm going to do my best using my monitor to see that I'm doing a decent job. Just from a top down though, before we go anywhere. Will you sit? Okay. So right away when I put him in, I was like, oh, wow, holy shit. I have this way wider than it needs to be. Way wider. My original goal was to have 3 passengers across, and then 2, and then 2, have 7 passengers maximum. That's going to be fine. And I could put, easily 3 minis on this bench alone. So I'm going to need to modify the carriage, at least in its width. And what I discovered also, which surprised me, is I figured the seats were going to be too small because the miniature is larger. And in fact, the seats are too big. The back of it looks fine, perfect. The seat width looks pretty good, but the seats are too tall. He can't get his feet on there if he sits back on it. So I was a little surprised. I did a lot of measurements. I tried to prepare for that, and I really feel like I missed it by a long shot. So that was one of the reasons why it was, before I do any real construction, I really needed to have a miniature in hand so I could fully understand exactly what modifications might need to be made. So he's my first little guy sitting, and I feel pretty positive. Here's the last thing I'll say is this, it took me a little while, I don't know, 3 hours, maybe 4 hours to do this. But that's better than I thought I might have to do. And knowing that I have to cut things and that I'm going to have to trim off stuff, it'll go a little faster, at least in the preliminary work, doing the final sculpting to actually finish the cloth work. That is going to take a little time, and we'll see how that goes when I get there. There we go. That is not a stunning achievement for a week's worth, little less. I've been busy of work, but these are milestones that really are driving some of the other features, so I was glad to get them done. So I hope you enjoyed taking a look at that work. It was, I think, very fruitful. I got down and dirty for a couple days and just started putting in hours. It's actually why this video is going out a little late, because yesterday I was like, I just have to finish this guy sitting. I just have to know that and get that done. So now that he's done and I can see how that works in the carriage, I can sit back and do a couple revisions to it. I want to think about it for a day or two. By then, the new styrene strips that I've ordered should arrive, and some styrene sheets and some more. I have a huge collection, so I thought, until I needed a bunch of pieces I don't have. And I was like, So might as well, let's just flesh it all out. How many different sizes of styrene strips are there? There's like a million of them, but in this kind of proportion, I guess, I was like, I need that and that and that. And so those should be arriving shortly. So until those pieces arrive, you can follow some of the progress by checking out my posts on Instagram. I have been posting fairly regularly for me, but I have no idea about how that is for Instagram. I don't look at anybody else's, and I don't respond to comments for the most part because I'm antisocial on social media. You can also follow the progress behind the scenes by becoming a patron and pledging some support on Patreon at whatever level you feel appropriate. I am working on changing some things there, and I'm working on putting up mini videos a lot more regularly. Some things I'm going to be moving some things around. So if you have never been to my Patreon page, it's a good time to go in about 4 days. And if you've been there, and didn't become a patron, you can go there in 4 days and see how things have changed. Maybe you become interested then. Any support at any level is huge, and I just want to put a big thank you out to my existing patrons. They are providing a level of support that is invaluable, and it exceeds just their financial contribution, which is substantive to me, but they support me in a lot of other ways. So I just want to thank them for that. I think that's everything, except I cleaned my bench. I redesigned everything. If you were looking on Instagram, you would know that. I revamped it from top to bottom, totally redesigned, got rid of a bunch of stuff, so organized. It's so clean and streamlined now. When I sat down to do work this week, I was just like, oh, I like working here. This is nice. It's nice. I'm very excited. Those are the kinds of things that, make my day. Although it took me 4 days to get it done. Now there's like a mess everywhere else. Shh, we won't look. I won't turn the camera. So, if you're interested in seeing my progress on the carriage, maybe seeing some more miniatures, a little review of the miniatures, I'll take a look at the comments, see what you people think. And hopefully you will be coming back for all of that, because you know that I will be back soon with another Terranscapes video.